I'm Philipe Moriel. I'm an associate professor here at the Ranch Cattle Research and Education Center. And we're going to talk a little bit about heat stress in beef cattle. Of course, this is a big topic. There's a lot of things to talk, and I'm not going to focus on everything. What I thought about, I wanted to share with you today is just to give you a brief introduction about the topic, all right, and some of the current challenges that we have for grazing animals. Particularly here in Southeast United States. And then I'm going to share with you some of the ongoing studies that we are conducting or that we are going to start trying to address some of these challenges that I'm going to share with you. Okay, so we have a study going on right now for replacement that we did already for 2 years with the replacement heifers, some for pregnant heifers, mature cows, as well as suckling calves. Okay, but I'll share more details about that in a minute. So heat stress, it is a significant constraint to maximize animal performance. It affects almost every metric of animal productivity, right? In the United States, it costs almost $1.2 billion every year due to decrease in animal performance, quality, or whatever indirect costs you would have with this decreased performance of those animals. Now, so it's crucial that we develop strategies to maximize animal welfare and productivity. Not only on the genetic side, right? In selecting for animals that are more thermotolerant is important and it's needed, but we also need to develop management, nutrition, and other strategies that can complement the selection efforts. Okay, even animals that are thermotolerant, they still are impacted by the heat stress that we have here in this region. So this slide I got from Dr. Silva and Dr. Di Lorenzo from Mariana at the North Florida Research and Education Center. It's a really good slide that summarizes the overall response, what happens in an animal when it's experiencing heat stress. So for example, and keep in mind that this is just a little bit of information. Nowadays, we know that a lot more is happening to this animal. So as the body temperature or the environmental temperature increases, the body temperature of the animal will also rise. And in order to deal with that, the animal will start changing their behavior. Okay, so we'll start seeking shade, or we'll start decreasing physical activity. We increase water intake, increase respiration and heart rate, right? Increase your sweating rate as well. And then at some point, you will start reducing feed intake, right? And they do that because the more you eat, the more rumen fermentation happens, which produces heat in the rumen, right? So that's what we call heat increment. So animal decreases feed intake so that it produces less heat, which contributes to rising the temperature in the body. Okay, and then for several years, we thought that this was the only reason why animals that are under heat stress perform less. Now we know that only 50% of the reduction in animal performance is explained by the reduction in feed intake, at least in dairy cattle. The other 50% is explained by the physiological and metabolic reactions that are occurring in this animal. I'm not going to cover that in details because it will be too long of a presentation, but keep in mind that there are a lot of shifts in energy metabolism, protein metabolism, or of these animals going on during heat stress that makes those animals less efficient. Okay, so nutrients, instead of being towards growth or performance, are being used to deal with the heat stress, and also in the top of that, you also have a reduced dry matter intake. Okay, there's some recent evidence that suggests that these physiological reactions and metabolic shifts that are happening in those animals during heat stress are very similar to what an immunological challenge would do to those animals. Okay, so a lot of things are going on, but the main message that I want to tell you is that animal change their behavior, but there's so much that he can do to cope with the heat stress, and then the next response will be reducing feed intake, but that's just part of the problem. The rest is what the indirect causes to their physiology and metabolism that are shifting. Okay, so we need to do something to help those animals deal with that. If we can avoid rises in body temperature, we can also reduce some of these impacts on feed intake and also the physiology of the animals. Now, our colleagues at the Animal Science Department in Gainesville, they have done a lot of research on dairy cattle management with heat stress, and they have shown that heat stress not only impacts the animal during the heat stress, but also in future generations, like for a long time. So for example, they have seen that calves that are born from cows that experience heat stress during late gestation, they are lighter at birth, about 9 pounds. They are lighter at weaning, close to 18 pounds, and that difference remained after 1 year of age. They also have reduced body weight gain after weaning, and a lot of the immunological measurements that you would do to measure the immune response capacity of these animals are also reduced throughout the post-weaning phase. And more recently, they also found out that the milk production of those heifers born from cows that experience heat stress during late gestation is reduced in the first and second lactations. And an even more recent finding suggests that the impacts of heat stress also happens in the granddaughters. So heat stress that is occurring during gestation is passing through multiple generations. Unfortunately, we don't have any of this evidence in beef cattle, and that's something that I'm going to try to address in the studies that we're starting this year. I mean, does heat stress has the same kind of impact on beef cattle, right, during the pregnancy, or does that impact more than one generation? And an even more interesting study is this one here in dairy cattle, that they showed that heat stress during gestation also impacts the heat tolerance of these animals to the same type of environment. So for example, calves that are born from cows that experienced heat stress during late gestation, when those calves are exposed to heat stress as well, they had decreased heat tolerance. In other words, they were less able to deal with the heat stress. But when those animals reach maturity, those cows, they handle the stress better, right? So the heat stress during gestation was negative. They had negative impacts on the calf heat tolerance, but helped those mature cows with heat tolerance when they're exposed to the same environment. So it changed over time. And so we don't know if in beef cattle the same thing happens, right? We don't know if, for example, heat stress that is experienced during gestation, does that prepare the heifer for the same environment, right, when they're exposed to the same environment after weaning, or does it make it worse, all right, or is there any interaction at all? So, and that's something that we're going to try to address in one of the studies that I'm going to share with you right now. Also, we don't know if it changes over time, right? Maybe it would happen the same response as we see in dairy cattle. So pre-weaning phase might be hurt by heat stress during gestation and not so much the post-weaning phase, but we don't know that yet, and this is something that we'll try to address. So what are some of the challenges that we have in heat stress for animals on grazing systems? Well, first, we have limited options to deal with the heat stress, like compared to feedlot systems. It's not that easy. You cannot put fence or sprinklers or cover the entire area, or you cannot change completely the entire diet of those animals. So the options are quite limited, and we need to find, so you pretty much are relying on management such as shade or nutrition, right? Changing the amount of feed or using feed additives, as we're going to share with you. And also the other problem is that heat stress effects varies among breeds. Most of the data that was developed on heat stress impacts was developed on animals that are in feedlot systems and Bos-Taurus animals. So we don't know to what extent those results really applies to animals that are on a grazing system. And also, we still, like I said at the beginning, we have no evidence if heat stress during gestation has any short or long-term impacts on the performance of the calves, all right, or the heifer progeny, or even if it passed through generations. Okay, so this is a situation that we are all familiar with here in Florida. These are this is a picture of heifers in August on Bahia grass pastures. A lot of heat, a lot of water, standing water. You would see flooded pastures all over. Definitely not a good situation for those heifers. Like very hard for them to deal with the heat stress, even though they have the Boston genetic influence, right? So how do we measure heat stress and how bad it is here for us? We all know that here in Florida is really hot, right? But let's put this in numbers so that we can have an idea. So the way that we measure heat stress is we use this thermal humidity index, or THI. Okay, so it's an equation that accounts for the temperature of the environment and the relative humidity. Okay, and then we come up with this number. So this is the THI that we observed in Ona in 2009, just to give you an example, from mid-August all the way to mid-November. So the blue line is the average THI daily, okay, and for this entire period. The green line is the maximum THI that was observed during the day. So at some point, we reached the highest THI level, and then that's where we record it. and the black line is the minimal THI that was observed. So how do we know that they are heat stress or not? So animals, they are considered, they are in the thermoneutral zone if the THI is below 70. They will be in heat stress if the THI is between 74 and 77. And they are in severe heat stress if it's above 77. So you guys can see that the average THI that we observed every day from mid-August, all the way to November was always above was at the beginning above the line of severe heat stress. And even towards November, it was still above the heat stress threshold. Only by mid-November, we finally reached levels that are below the thermoneutral zone. But even on that day, right, at some points during the day, we reached a THI maximum that was above the severe heat stress conditions. Right, in average, you would see these conditions about 9 hours of the day, at least during this first part. So it's a severe problem. That just helps to put in perspective how bad these conditions are for those animals. And also, this is a very long period of heat stress. Most of the studies you guys will see in literature, they provided heat stress challenge for about 60 days. And I'm showing you guys here at least 5 months. Okay, not 5 months, I'm sorry, but 4 months. And remember, these conditions, they start in May. So it's a very long chronic exposure to heat stress for those animals. So why am I sharing that too? Because that period of heat stress also corresponds to very critical moments in the cow-calf production in Southeast United States. So for example, the vast majority of producers, they will have their breeding season from January to March, okay, or just a little bit later than that. So that means that the calves are weaned around July, calving season happening sometime end of October, November. So from June to September, this corresponds to late gestation period of first calf counts. July and August, that's when we'll be weaning and shipping our calves. And then August to November, obviously that's when we are developing replacement heifers and we have the late gestation of multiparous counts. So all the studies that I'm gonna show to you, we are trying to address what can we do in terms of heat stress to help the performance of those animals in all these critical moments. So the first strategy that I'm gonna share to you, you guys might have seen this in another presentation, is the stair-step strategy, okay? Here in Florida, we know that replacement heifers, they need to be supplemented on a quite relatively large amount of supplement, right? 1.5% of their body weight. So they have to be supplemented. It's a quite large amount of supplementation. So there are several ways that you can provide this supplementation, right? One of them is just constant, right? To achieve a constant average daily gain. So for example, you supplement them at 1% of their body weight, so they will gain 1 pound a day from August all the way to November, all right? The other way is this stair-step strategy. It's a little bit riskier, but it does work. So what you do here is that you slow down their body weight gain during the first half of that period. And then after that, you increase the amount of feed to try to compensate for that time. Why would you do that? When you have periods of low gain followed by periods of high gain, you usually experience compensatory gain, right? So those animals, at the end of the whole study, they would either achieve the same body weight compared to the control, which is the constant group, but eating less, or they will consume the same total amount, but they will actually be heavier at the time that they end the study. And remember, this is August. So during the first half of this period that is really hot, we're decreasing the amount of feed. So the idea is that with less feed during the hot periods, less contributions to heat production. And then whenever it's a little bit cooler, I can then provide the amount of feed that I saved, induce this compensatory gain, and maybe that will be helpful for those heifers, okay? So that's the idea that we had. We did this study for 2 years. So just to put into numbers, it was 64 Brangus heifers for each year, so 128 heifers over those 2-year period, all of them on Bahia grass pastures. The control group was supplemented with concentrate at 1.5% of their body weight from early September all the way, mid-August all the way to November. It's about 100 days. And then we had the stair-step group, which was supplemented at 1% during the first 50 days, and then 2% of their body weight for the next 50-day period, right? So the total amount of feed is exactly the same. We're just playing with the amount, right? Trying to help them deal with the heat stress. And then after 100 days, they were synchronized and we assigned them to the breeding season, okay? Now, what did we see? During the first 50 days of the study, heifers that were supplementing the stair-step strategy, same average daily gain compared to the control. No differences. Even though those the control heifers were consuming about 50% more feed. So they were supplemented at 1.5 during the first 50 days, whereas the stair-step heifers, they were supplemented at 1%. So even though they were eating 50% more, they gained the same. What we believe happened is, look at this figure here. This is the intravaginal temperature of those heifers that was collected for 8 consecutive days, every 30 minutes in every single day. All right. So you guys can see, right, that midnight it starts low. As soon as the sun rises, the intravaginal temperature will increase and reach its peak around 5 o'clock. And then once the sun sets, or at least you slow down a little bit the heat, those intravaginal temperatures will decrease. So the heifers that were supplemented at 1.5%, they have significantly greater intravaginal temperatures for most part of the day compared to those that were supplemented at 1%. Right, and the black line is the THI levels that we see average throughout that day. Okay, so it starts at around 72, but then around 2 o'clock you reach its peak in close to 83. Remember, above 77, it's already considered severe heat stress. And it took until, and at that time, it never reached the level below 70, which is the thermoneutral zone. So what we think happened here is that those heifers that were supplemented 1.5%, the control, they were just wasting that extra amount of feed trying to deal with the heat stress, right? The extra amount of feed led to more heat production, increased intravaginal temperatures. They didn't gain as much as what they should. Now look at what happens in the next 50 days. Now pay attention to the black line, right? This is the first 50 days. Now this is the second 50-day period. You can see a significant reduction. Now, for most part of the day, it's below 70, which is the thermoneutral zone. Only for a few hours of the day, it reached this level of between 74 to 77, which is considered heat stress, but not above 77, which is severe. Now, during this time, the second 50-day period, remember the control is still receiving 1.5% of their body weight with supplement, and the stair-step heifers are receiving 2%, right? But now they are gaining way more than the control group. The reason might be just the compensatory gain that I told you at the beginning, or it could be that now that the heat stress conditions are not as severe, the extra amount of feed is not increasing their body temperature, and instead of being using to deal with the heat stress, they're using those nutrients for growth. So when you look at the overall average daily gain for these heifers, all right, for over the entire 100-day period, we see that they gain about close to 1/4 pound more, right? 0.2 pounds more per day over 100 days. So at the end of the 100-day period, they were about 18 pounds heavier at the start of the synchronization protocol, and no differences in the total amount of supplement. So with the same amount of feed, just by changing how much I'm feeding at the first half and the second half period, I boosted their growth performance without increasing feed costs and help reduce the intravaginal temperatures of those animals, which will be an indicator of heat stress. Now, what happens to their reproductive performance? No differences in puberty, no differences in heifers showing heat, right, during the astro-synchronization protocol. No differences in AI, at least in the first year. This is just year 1. But look at the heifers that were supplemented the stair-step strategy. Almost 90% pregnancy rates compared to those that were in the control group that were close to 72. So this strategy worked out pretty good. Helped them deal with the heat stress, right? Reduce intravaginal temperatures, increase their growth, increase their reproductive performance without increasing feed costs. And I would like to thank the Cattlemen Association, because the Florida Cattlemen Enhancement Board, they are the ones that funded these studies. So we are in the process of sending this for publication, and we will share more with everybody in the state. But this is a strategy that worked out really good. There are several ramifications that we can do for this study, which we can spend all day talking about it, what we could do. But this is just a pilot study. We're gonna continue working on that, trying to fine tune some of these strategies. Now, What about the upcoming studies that we have going on for this year? The overall idea is that we're going to use feed additives and management to help alleviate heat stress and increase their performance of these bee females in our conditions. Okay, so the management strategy that we'll use is the shade, just providing shade to those animals. And we are using artificial shade just because it's an easy way to make it very uniform among all pastures. Okay, and also it's relatively inexpensive to implement. And we have seen that it does protect cattle from direct solar radiation exposure, reduce total heat load by almost 50%, reduce rectal temperatures of those animals about half of the Celsius degree, and also decrease respiration rate, which is an indicator of heat stress levels. Now, Dr. Silva and Dr. Di Lorenzo, they just published this paper that was done in Mariana, where they provided shade or no shade using artificial shade structures for Brangus heifers during 49 days of the summer. What they've seen is that those heifers that were provided shade significantly lower intervaginal temperatures, right? Even in North Florida, which you expect to be a little less heat stress than here in South Florida. But look at the average daily gain of those heifers. Those that were provided shade, they gain about 0.44 pounds a day, and those that were not provided shade, they pretty much have a slightly loss in average daily gain for this entire summer period. So even Brangus animals that are supposed to be thermotolerant or more thermotolerant than other breeds, they still suffer from the heat stress. So there's some room for us to work with and boost their performance. Why do I want to use artificial shade? I know that in Florida, most people rely on natural shade, right, for their cattle. And most of the time they have enough for those animals. But remember, this is a very long period of heat stress. And at some point, we have to rotate animals among our pastures. So not every pasture has enough shade or has the same amount of shade throughout the entire year. And it's not that uncommon to drive through 75 or those smaller roads in Florida and see a lot of pastures with animals that have zero shade or a very small amount. So our idea is not to, it's pretty much to give the producer an option of, in situations that have limited access of shade, we can use this strategy to make sure the animal performance will be increased, right? And that's what we want to see in this study. And then the other strategy that I'm going to use is what's called OmniGen. This is a feed additive that is being fed to dairy cattle. And we also have use here with our replacement heifers, with Brangus heifers, that it can reduce intervaginal temperatures of those animals. Okay, so we're trying to use management, which is access to shade, which is just one of the options of management. And the other one would be nutrition, which is supplementation of this feed additive. So this first study that we started 2 weeks ago is exactly that, right? It's trying to use management and nutrition during pregnancy and early postpartum period to see if there's any long-term impacts on the calf performance, right? Also the cow performance. So what we're gonna do, what we did is we had 64 Brangus heifers that are pregnant. Okay, they're gonna calve around end of September, early October, and they're all on Bahia grass pastures. And then we assigned half of those pastures received shade, artificial shade that I showed you here at the beginning, right? And then half of those pastures will receive, and then within each of those two, and half of them do not receive shade, right? And then within each of those two groups, half of them receive the supplement, the OmniGen, that's supposed to help alleviate intervaginal temperatures, and half of them will don't. So we have all four possible combinations from July all the way to January, to the start of the breeding season of this first calf count. Okay, so you have animals that no shade and no supplement, only shade, no shade but only supplement and no shade, and shade and supplement. The idea, and then okay, and then in January we wean those calves. The cows will be assigned to bulls, and we were going to evaluate for a breeding season, for a 90-day breeding season period. And then the calves will be sent to the feedlot, and we're going to challenge their immune system. And again, the idea is to see if management and nutrition can help alleviate heat stress, and does that impact the performance of the mothers, and does that have any carryover effects on the offspring? The idea here of that, the first question that we want to see is that first, if nutrition can actually replace access to shade. So for example, you might be in a situation that you don't have enough shade in your pasture, but you don't have access to a structure or you cannot build one. Maybe you can use this type of supplementation strategy to replace the shade. That's what we want to do in that study. Or we also want to answer the question is, can nutrition and management be combined and cause an additive effect, right? Have the greatest benefits to animal performance. So in that case, you could use this supplementation strategy, regardless if you have enough shade or not, okay? Again, like I said, we started about 2 weeks ago, and we will have the final data of this study by April of next year. Now, the second study, what we're going to do is very similar to the dairy folks, where they look at heat tolerance that changed from calf all the way to cow maturity. All right, so the idea here is to see if heat stress in beef cattle, does it help? Does it prepare the animal to encounter the same environment later in their life, or does it make it worse? Okay, so starting in August, about 160 Brangus pregnant mature cows. We're going to assign them, half of them to a control with no shade at all, and then half of them will receive access to shade, all the way to calving. Once those animals calve in November, they're all going to be managed exactly the same, all the way to weaning. At weaning, we sell the steers, we ship them to another state, and then part of the heifers will stay at ONA, and they're going to be developed from August all the way to November. But at the time that we start developing those heifers, we're going to assign them to the same treatments that were provided to their mother. So again, you have all 4 possible combinations. So you have heifers that were born from cows that never received shade during late gestation, and they also will not be provided shade during the post-weaning phase, all right? And then all the consecutive treatments, all right? So again, the idea here is to answer, does heat stress during late gestation has long-term impacts on the progeny, right? Does it prepare the heifer or does it make it worse for them later in life? And then the last study that we're planning to do is with suckling weaned calves. We're looking at providing creep feeding supplementation for those calves for the last 90 days before weaning, okay, from May to August. And then, but half of those animals will be added with the OmniGen. The supplement is a feed additive that helps reduce body temperature, and half of them will not receive the supplement. The cost for these calves is about 3 cents a day. So I estimated that we need to increase weaning weights about 5 pounds only per calf to break even. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna feed those 2 treatments for about 90 days before weaning, and then we're going to look at their vaccine response, pre-weaning growth performance, and all those factors. Okay. The idea here again is that by providing the supplementation, I reduce body temperature of those calves. It will indirectly increase their body weight gain to the point that will pay for the investment cost. Now, it could be that at the end of all those studies, we don't have any responses that, like I'm saying, right? Which is fine, because it will still be a response that we don't have in the literature right now. We don't have any indications if heat stress during gestation has so long impacts as we have seen in dairy folks, right, with the dairy cattle. So regardless of what we see, it will be a good result that we'll use to design future studies. So before I end, I would like just to share with you, I don't know why the top is not showing, but we're going to have our 4th annual nutrition for beef females on August the 13th. Okay, this program, we are asking for everybody to register online. It's going to be free, and it's going to be a hybrid format. So you guys, when you register, you can decide if you want to attend in person here at ONA, or if you want to join just the meeting via webinar. Okay, and then if you want to do online, you're going to receive the link to connect, right? But we are asking everybody to pre-register, so we have an idea of how many people are actually attending in person, and we can have a head count for the dinner. And this year, what we're going to do, we're going to focus on pre-calving supplementation. The first presentation is mine. I'll talk about a lot of the studies that the Florida Cattlemen Enhancement Board funded with the pre-calving supplementation of protein and energy, and how does that impact the cow and calf performance. The second presentation is Dr. Ronaldo Cook from Texas A&M. He will also talk about pre-calving supplementation of cows, but focusing on trace minerals and fat, and how does that impact the long-term performance of the calves. And then the third presentation is pregnancy loss in beef cattle from Dr. Kai Poehler, also from Texas A&M. And he will talk all about the factors that causes pregnancy loss in beef cattle and some of the strategies to early detect those pregnancy losses. Okay, it's going to be very interesting. These guys are highly recognized in the whole country. So it would be great presentations for this program. And then after that, we're gonna have a short producer roundtable just to talk to some of the producers that will attend the meeting about, do they apply any of those strategies that we are talking about, or do they know anybody that are applying those strategies? And if not, what are some of the limitations of why not people are not implementing them, as we're going to show that it does work and it is economically feasible. Okay, so again, thank you all the sponsors for the help, and please register at this link here before attending the meeting. All right. I know that a lot of the things that I said, we're still hypothetical, right? So we don't know exactly what will happen, but if anybody has any evidence of any other studies that were done and could share, just let me know as well. But I think all of those studies will be quite interesting and will add a lot of novel information that we don't have. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Hey, so before you go, I have a few announcements on some upcoming events. So give me just a quick moment here to close off this presentation and open a different one. All right, so to start, I would like to invite you guys to come back and join us on August the 3rd for an ONA highlight with guest presenters, Cliff Coddington and Jim Hanley with the Florida Cattlemen's Association. They will be here at the center and they will be discussing the current issues and incentives of the Florida Cattlemen's Association. This event, Dr. Moriel already went over very well, the 4th annual Nutrition for Beef Females on August 13th. Next up, we have a forage management tour and workshop that's going to be held on August the 26th. That's a Thursday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's going to be held at Mudge Ranch in LaBelle. The cost to attend is $40, and that includes lunch, so be sure and register soon. We have the final session for the Become a Bluebird Watcher of this series coming up on Saturday, September 11th. There is no fee to attend. Be sure and check that out. They'll be discussing preparing for the next nesting season, and they'll be sharing their project results from the study that they did this year here at the center. On September the 23rd, that is a Thursday, from 5:30 to 8:30 in Dade City at the Pasco County Extension Auditorium, there is going to be the Winter Supplementation Seminar. Those speaking will be Dr. Philipe Moriel, Dr. Joven Dramini, and Dr. Chet Taylor. And you have options here to attend either in person, it's a $10 fee, or virtually for $5. And in October on the 8th, here at the center, they're going to have their next Cattle Women's College, Cattle Management for Women. I can't remember how many of these events they've had. They're very popular and they limit their attendance to 40. The fee is $40 to attend, and that includes materials and lunch. And this usually sells out pretty quickly. So if you're thinking you might like to attend this event, you need to register soon. So as always, if you're not already doing so, try to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. If you're not signed up to receive our weekly emails, please shoot me an email back whenever I send you this information to say, please add me, and I'll get you on there so you don't miss anything that's going on. And again, we thank you guys for attending today's ONA Highlight, and we look forward to seeing you in August.